The United States Federal Reserve is considering the creation of a digital dollar.
In order to introduce CBDCs, you need digital IDs.
A digital ID system could be operating between governments and the private sector as soon as next year.
A CBDC is a digital currency that they think is going to replace all physical cash.
If we lose cash, our money is getting locked into the banking system.
It's hard to overstate how dangerous a path this is.
This is the elimination of the underground economy.
And who's pushing for this? Well, the central planners.
CBDCs is the next step closer to a social credit score.
To boost financial inclusion, Mexico's central bank will launch digital currency by 2024.
There are people who believe in top-down control, and they're excited by the idea of central bank digital currency as what they call a programmable money.
Many of the important qualities of a good money could be changed like this, by programming it, by government decree.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoking emergency powers against the truckers who are protesting vaccine mandates. Banks can now freeze their personal accounts.
We were never charged. There was never a warrant for our arrest.
You're dead in the water at this point.
What you're seeing is the banks in this country have been deputized into law enforcement.
We're lucky that at this point we still have cash that we can rely on.
After a 3-week delay, Nigeria's digital currency is now legal tender.
What they did in Nigeria was they made them the test case for the CBDCs, which is a complete disaster. It turned into burning banks and riots.
And do we want to live in such a society where a small group of central planners have this extraordinary power over everyone's lives?
Even tyranny, starvation, impoverishment, that could be the result.
The powers of CBDCs are so extraordinary. Even the worst dictators in past centuries could only have dreamt of having such enormous power over the lives of so many people.
I'm James Patrick, the director of the following film about central bank digital currencies, cryptocurrencies, and the tokenization of every person and object on this planet. You see, money in banking can promote prosperity and freedom, or oppression and slavery. The financial system as we know it now sits at a crossroads. Powerful international banking interests behind each of our central banks and the Bank of International Settlements are in the process of foisting malicious reforms upon all the nations of the world that will limit human freedom on this planet if they succeed. Banking interests are moving to abolish cash worldwide, and with it our civil liberties. I made this film as a warning to the world. Please help spread the word on this important issue and share this film and promote freedom.
A potential CBDC could offer businesses and consumers new ways to pay in the future.
Most Western governments also have these pilot programs, so there is a massive move toward a central bank digital currency.
Around the world, central banks are racing to create their own versions of digital money. And nowhere is this happening faster than in China.
China with a pilot with 128 million participants.
By 2030, Bitcoin will be up and running.
Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell told the House Financial Services Committee in March that the Fed had already begun testing a digital dollar.
So what we're doing is experimenting in kind of early stage experimentation.
法定通貨の円を電子データにしたデジタル円について
The decision will definitely be made to launch the CBDC and to make it a reality.
Central banks around the world are testing, prototyping, and implementing central bank digital currencies. So what are they?
A CBDC is a digital currency that they think is going to replace all physical cash.
Put simply, a central bank digital currency, or a CBDC, is a direct digital liability to the central bank. So rather than have your money in your pocket or in a card with a bank, it's directly maintained by the government.
central bank digital currencies, I mean, they're presented, CBDCs are presented as if it's something brand new, when the reality is we've been using BDCs, bank digital currencies, for many decades.
Fundamentally, a CBDC fails to offer anything unique for consumer. The only benefit that a CBDC seems to offer is for governments that want to enact more control.
A key difference with the CBDC is that central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of central bank liability, and also we will have the technology to enforce that.
As Carol Quigley of Georgetown University once said, there exists a worldwide system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. At the apex of this system is the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, the central bank of central banks. The Bank of International Settlements has created a CBDC program in practically every country of the world through its Innovation Hub, a tech incubator set up for this purpose. The vision these autocrats have for us is to make our money programmable.
The really big dangers of CBDCs are the programmability, which is that essentially it's not even money. It's like your money becomes potential money.
The whole thing about programmable money is they decide when you will have access to it and how you will be able to spend it even. Let's say you're grocery shopping, and since you're expecting guests on the weekend, you buy 4 or 5 bottles of wine, right? On the way home, you decide to fill up your car with gas. You stop at the gas station, but you're not going to be able to pump the gas. Well, you just bought alcohol, right? Look to China. That is going to be our future, and it's not going to be a future in like 30, 40, 50 years from now. It is happening now.
CBDC can allow government agencies and private sector players to allow targeted policy functions. For example, welfare payment. For example, consumption coupon. For example, food stamp.
If Congress decides that we should defund the fossil fuel industry, it would be easy for them to say, you know, the money we're lending you, you're not allowed to lend to the oil industry. And that means politicizing the allocation of credit, which is a very dangerous thing to do.
This is something that affects both sides of the aisle, really, because the options for control through things like programmability are really limitless. It just depends who's in power.
Really what they're doing is having more control over who can buy, who can sell, who can save, and if they want at any point, they can use those programs and the protocols and the blockchains to blacklist your money, to prevent you from making a transaction.
If you think about the benefits of digital money, you can have programmability. You could have, as I argue in my book, a potentially better and some people might see it as a darker world where the government decides that units of central bank money can be used to purchase some things, but not other things that it deems less desirable, like say ammunition or drugs or pornography or something of the sort. And that is very powerful in terms of the use of a CBDC.
In 2019, we had MasterCard introduce a credit card in conjunction with the United Nations that monitored your carbon footprint.
It's the first credit card ever to stop you from overspending, in line with the UN 2030 recommendation.
And once you hit a certain level, it cut off spending,
bringing it to a direct halt, making it a radical tool against climate change.
The Bank of England was the first to come out and said, oh, well, you know, they should be programmable. The excuse was laughable, but they said a mother should be able to prevent her child from buying a chocolate bar for lunch instead of a sandwich. If a mother can program what you're not allowed to buy, they can. All right, that's the back door.
When they describe programmability, that's what it's all about. That you can, I mean, of course, they present it from a positive side. We can give money to the people who really need it. That's how they will formulate it. But the other side of the coin is that this means that they have their ideas on who should spend money on what and when.
To better understand the implications of these technologies, we must look at the social credit system of China, which has been heavily praised by the likes of Klaus Schwab, head of the World Economic Forum.
The biggest dangers of a central bank digital currency system can be seen in China, where it's linked in to the surveillance state. If everybody has an account on the books of a government-owned bank, then the government has access in real time to what people are buying. And if it wants to, it can censor those payments. Oh, you don't have enough social credit points? You can't buy that train ticket.
Everywhere she goes, Ouyang Haoyu is followed. What she buys, how she behaves, is tracked and scored to show how responsible and trustworthy she is.
They're constantly monitored by facial recognition cameras that are able to instantly put a face to a name.
CBDCs is the next step closer to a social credit score.
It's called the social credit system, and in one version now being tested, a person's reputation is scored on a scale of 350 to 950. And Haoyu, with a good score of 752, is okay with it. In fact, most people are.
CBDC is going to enable all of that. So if your purchase is not green enough, you're going to get throttled back on your credit.
China is the totalitarian testbed for the central bankers' technological control systems. In Chinese cities today, it is almost impossible to function without digital payments and biometric identification. The social credit score system in China is nearing perfection.
My name is Vince Gerses. I'm from Toronto, Ontario. I'm a former member of the Ontario Provincial Police. I spent 32 years in law enforcement. I think it's very important to look at the Chinese model because that would be the direction things would seem to go. You know, the Chinese seem to be setting the stage for social credit scores integrated into CBDCs and integrated into automated payment systems and the way they operate there. It's a different structure.
A good score brings benefits, but people with low scores lose rights. The cinema names and shames people considered untrustworthy, plastering their details, even their addresses, across big screens.
It's a matter of principle. Those people have to be condemned.
Those people aren't honest, so they have to pay the price.
It's only right to pay your debts. You have to blacklist those that don't.
CBDC will help them do all of this. They don't like what you're thinking, you're going to be debanked.
Unfortunately, what we're seeing in China and now what we're starting to see in the Western world over the last 3 years is a tremendous amount of disrespect for rights and freedoms of people, regardless of what your constitution says. And that's a very dangerous step. It's a very dangerous process.
A parallel technology that is required to make CBDCs work are digital IDs. A person's identity must be verified and linked to their wallet.
Digital IDs are not really a separate project from CBDCs and this new digital financial system.
A key component of central bank digital currencies is digital ID. They go hand in hand with each other to be able to identify with certainty who the person is and then what the transactions are and link them together.
And UN documentation and also documentation from the Bank of International Settlements, they very overtly state that CBDCs and digital IDs are meant to go together, and without digital IDs, the CBDC digital finance system cannot exist. Almost all of these digital IDs rely on biometrics, which can be your fingerprints, your face, the iris of your eyeball. They want to have your wallet tied to a digital ID and have that digital ID be mapped to your physical ID through the biometric data collection. The BRICS countries are doing it, the West is doing it.
Passengers on the Moscow metro can now pay for their commute using facial recognition technology.
Facial recognition checkout is coming to stores and restaurants near you.
Amazon says no two palms are alike. You hold your hand above the device.
They want to move not just to a cashless society, but a cashless and cardless society. The goal is to have you pay with your face or pay with your biometrics or your palm of your hand. This is already being rolled out at Amazon-owned entities. JP Morgan is piloting it.
MasterCard already working on this new way to pay. JP Morgan has also signed a deal.
I'm sure at some point, if you don't want to use your biometrics for those purposes, then your bank will be like, sorry.
The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is continuing its global push, and this time setting its sight on Kenya to support its so-called government-backed digital ID programs.
Back in 2016, the most comprehensive biometric digital ID system in the world was deployed in India, a country of 1.4 billion people. If it could be done in India, it could be done anywhere.
Microsoft founder Bill Gates has endorsed India's biometric identification system Aadhaar, saying that it does not pose any privacy risks.
You've been an advocate of Aadhaar. You've supported it, you've defended it, and I think that the questions arise not on whether it's a good idea or not, but whether it should be made mandatory for every citizen.
Well, Aadhaar is just something that avoids you pretending to be somebody else. So the basic Aadhaar mechanism is an identity mechanism. And so it's too bad if somebody thinks because Aadhaar is there, that in and of itself creates a privacy problem.
The goal is to link that ocean of data to a biometrically verified digital ID.
Data is now the new commodity. Data is the new oil.
Everyone's movements, purchasing activities, social relations, personal preferences are all being tracked and cataloged. As Indian Prime Minister Modi said, data is the new oil, data is the new gold.
Data is the new oil. Data is the new gold.
What ID 2020 and other organizations like it are doing are issuing the technical standards that all these IDs have to have so that they're interoperable at the base level.
Government and central bank management of digital ID systems violates the constitutions of many countries. So to avoid these legal obstacles, the strategy was taken to blur the lines between public and private sectors through the creation of decentralized interoperable databases. Organizations like ID 2020, funded by the Gates Foundation, are creating the protocols and standards that both public and private entities use to access the data housed in an interoperable, decentralized fashion.
And so the role of the Gates Foundation as an advocate for those who don't have access today is to make sure there's technology and standards.
There are no universally accepted standards for expressing, exchanging, and verifying digital credentials across organizational boundaries. A new form of digital identity, since it's not tied to any one organization, can enable such digital credentials to work everywhere.
We're working with government and the private sector to build the foundation and standards for digital identity across Canada and internationally. The future is closer than you think.
Decentralization isn't always good. Our identifications, personal information, health records, employment information, educational background, travel records, anything you can think of will be available to any authorized public or private sector entity with the right digital credentials. This is a clever way to bypass our civil rights, a pervasive and seamless system of social control through a public-private partnership.
There is no limits to what this digital ID will ultimately hold on data. It's just another way of exercising control over people.
One of the main reasons for this coordinated global push to develop digital IDs is because it's deemed essential to the entire Sustainable Development Agenda.
10 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals cannot be met without first closing the identity gap.
Over 1 billion people worldwide are unable to prove their identity through any recognized means.
The leading alliance that was launched under the auspices of the UN to accomplish that is known as ID 2020.
We live in a digital era.
Individuals need a trusted, verifiable way to prove who they are,
both in the physical world
and online.
The oligarchs behind these schemes, such as the Rockefeller Foundation and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, are pushing this agenda globally through their NGOs and the United Nations. In the developing world, these systems are being sold as a way to promote financial inclusion in an effort to bank the unbanked.
You can have digital financial inclusion.
The reality is that these technologies' whole purpose is to financially exclude anyone that doesn't obey the rules and protocols of the system. Have you been a good little boy or girl today? No? No meat for you. You're not allowed to leave your 15-minute zone.
ID 2020, the UN and other stakeholders in this particular sphere often argue that the reason this is necessary is because of what they call the identity gap. And the identity gap is the claim that the lack of digital ID is preventing people, mainly the world's poor, from accessing essential services, whether it's banking, whether it's education, whether it's healthcare.
A crisis is both a danger and an opportunity. The fact that 1 billion people are today denied this fundamental human right of having a recognized identity is indeed a crisis.
If you don't participate in digital ID, you won't have a legally recognized identity, you won't have rights, you won't be able to access services without it. So it's being framed as promoting inclusion, but the system itself is inherently exclusionary.
These structures being erected will create a system of financial exclusion not inclusion, not hitherto seen before. Just as biometric IDs were piloted in India, so CBDCs were piloted in Nigeria, a country of almost 230 million people. Nigeria was chosen as the testbed for the launching of CBDCs, as one of the most informal cash economies of the world. If they could make CBDCs work there, they could make them work anywhere, so they thought.
In Nigeria, one of the first countries to get off the ground with its CBDC for a population of over 200 million people, it didn't go well.
So the way the CBDC in Nigeria was set up is that in order to access the CBDC, you have to have a national identification number, which is the Nigerian Digital ID project.
And there are many pilots. Now we have Nigeria stepping there, the largest universe of a pilot.
What they did in Nigeria was they made them the test case for the CBDCs.
After a 3-week delay, Nigeria's digital currency is now legal tender. At its launch, President Muhammadu Buhari says the e-naira will usher in opportunities for banks, customers, and the country's economy.
At least 60% of the economy was underground.
Out of the gate, about 0.5% of the population was using the CBDC known as the e-naira. Now, the central bank wanted to spur adoption. That was not a good rate for them to have after they invested all this money. So they announced that there would be no longer requirements for bank accounts to have an e-naira. That didn't work. A month later, they announced that they would have discounts on the e-naira. That didn't work either. And that's when the Central Bank of Nigeria took a different path. Suddenly, it announced that it would start restricting cash. Then, as if that wasn't bad enough, it announced that it was going to pull all of the cash off the streets.
Such a task would normally take several years to phase in. Instead, the Nigerian government invalidated all the cash in the country and attempted to roll out the CBDC within 2 months. All cash was canceled, everyone lost their savings, no one had money to buy food, CBDCs were issued, and riots broke out.
There are claims that some persons were killed.
The way things are is not fair. We all are citizens. We only came to at least plead with the bank. Police came out of the central bank, started shooting, attacking us. They even killed people. About 3 persons died today. Nobody wanted to destroy anything.
Months later, despite riots in the streets, despite protests outside of banks, despite people going hungry because they didn't have access to cash that they were dependent on, Central Bank Governor Godwin Emefiele said this was a success. The adoption rate of the CBDC rose from 0.5% to 6% of the population, celebrated it as a success, as being the currency of choice, in his words. It was not the currency of choice by any means. It was a currency of force.
People have very much resisted in Nigeria the CBDC. They've tried not to use it. The Nigerian government is relatively open that it's completely surveillable and not anonymous. It was designed to surveil. So despite the fact that they created these conditions to coerce people into using the CBDC, the populace resists.
Transforming the underlying economics of financial services through digital currency will help those who live in poverty directly.
These people that ostensibly suffer from this identity gap, that suffer from financial exclusion, don't want the financial inclusion that they're being offered by the CBDC.
The COVID lockdown and vaccination campaigns are informative to understanding the development of CBDCs. During the COVID period, broad social controls were tested and prototyped. Controls that would have only been possible once the CBDC is in place.
The COVID policies, given that they were medically not really justifiable and some of them were very contradictory and nonsensical, but every country in the world seemed to have the same policies. And so there was an extraordinary degree of coordination that was revealed to us.
Global health regulations propagated by the United Nations in this period constituted the first serious attempt at the creation of a world government.
That was an attempt to bring about a single world order.
You know, as from the perspective of the UN and a lot of these other entities, national governments are merely enabling environments or policy enforcers on the policy's subjects, which are the public. They don't write the policies, they're handed the policies. And this is why you have these coordinated pushes, like for example with COVID-19, countries around the world implementing the same responses. And it's the same too for digital ID, for CBDCs or digital currency, they're all functionally the same at the end of the day.
The vaccine passports were a trial run of a system of social exclusion not hitherto seen until that time.
Private companies can deny you services or access if they ask you for proof of vaccination and you decline to show it.
Digital IDs are going to be like vaccine passports on steroids, really. You don't have the right ID, you won't exist.
Vaccine passports are coming. Someday soon, you may need to prove your COVID status to go to the pub, travel abroad, or even go to work.
Hello everyone, meet Lucy, student in psychology, and me, her digital ID wallet issued by the government to offer a wide range of identity services. Right now, I'm reminding Lucy of the appointment she needs to schedule for her mandatory vaccination.
The COVID operation, many of the policies had no proper medical justification or purpose. Whereas if you have to have policies that partly was used to even sort of lay the groundwork for CBDCs, there's plenty of evidence. I mean, why did the Bank of England come out around the time when the first lockdown was announced with its first sort of public consultation about introducing CBDCs and all the benefits and needs of CBDCs?
Today, governments force all banks to follow a strict regulatory regime known as AML and KYC regulations. This stands for Anti-Money Laundering and Know Your Customer regulations.
They started it with the COVID scam. Oh, you can get sick by handling cash. And they talked in a lot of stores that we no longer accept cash. This was the agenda.
The collapse in the use of cash, thanks to the COVID crisis.
Money changes hands all the time, but can it carry the coronavirus?
In order to avoid the risk of transmission through physical handling of money, we encourage the use of cashless transactions.
A lot of people aren't using cash. The vast amount of transactions are electronic today.
For CBDCs to properly do their job, you need to get rid of the competition. You need to get rid of cash. That actually is a declared goal of CBDCs.
If we lose cash, our money is getting locked into the banking system. We can no longer withdraw our deposits from the banks. And for instance, central banks could impose negative interest rates and thereby wipe out our savings.
The COVID model is the problem. The government could not come out and restrict free speech, so they had Facebook and everybody else do it. What you really have to understand is, like, you have no right to free speech. It's not a constitutional right. It's a restraint upon government. The Fed would have to get a search warrant to go through your accounts. If the bank basically issues the digital dollar, bank doesn't need a search warrant.
Americans do not have financial privacy. They have deputized banks as these sort of law enforcement investigators and force them to observe and report on the government's behalf because of laws like the Bank Secrecy Act, the Patriot Act.
Since the 1960s, these regulations have gotten stronger and stronger. Banks are required to monitor and surveil everything we do and report all suspicious activities to the government. Even if CBDCs are not achieved in some countries, an escalation of AML and KYC policies can produce a system just as oppressive as CBDCs. These AML and KYC regulations need to be reduced or eliminated to restore our civil rights.
This can quickly expand, and that's what the history of financial surveillance and control has been, one of steady expansion. And the more that expands, the more people are going to want to avoid that system. They need to stop this practice, surveilling all financial transactions.
A social credit system needs excuses to be implemented. One talking point that is likely to be used to rationalize the implementation of CBDCs is that we need to save the environment, that we need to live sustainably, or we are just being selfish.
I hear people say, your future's bright. But after this past year, I wonder if that's still true. When I see the news, sometimes I'm overwhelmed.
Entire ecosystems are collapsing.
London's Mayor Sadiq Khan has slammed global policymakers for their alleged inaction towards worsening climate crisis.
As real environmental issues go ignored, focus of these policies have everything to do with controlling people and economically handicapping them.
The Oxfordshire County Council approved plans to lock residents into one of 6 zones to save the planet from global warming.
Another hyped crisis. Of course, I'm talking about climate change.
During the COVID episode, an idea floated by media and governments were that lockdowns were needed to save the planet. Climate lockdowns, they called them.
Could climate lockdowns be on the horizon?
It's the idea that emissions start going far too high, the government is going to have to do things about it.
They will ban private vehicles from 6 areas at certain times and are set to be introduced next year.
They want control over almost every aspect of your life. They want more of your money and your freedom. We need to aggressively push back at every turn.
I mean, we are talking about dystopian digital prisons that will be created through central bank digital currencies, because the programmability, and this has been mentioned in the studies by central banks, include, of course, geography. And there's this proposal for climate change, for whatever reasons, that, you know, people should stay within their 15-minute walking small local area and be restricted.
The Oxfordshire Council will place electronic gates on key roads in and out of the city, confining residents to their own neighbourhoods.
What if we could create a new normal where we reclaim our time, our health and well-being, and our communities?
This is the idea behind the 15-minute city. A 15-minute city is one where everything we need is close to home, where communities are safe and inclusive.
The 15-minute ghettos, you know, it's not about saving the planet. It's not about adding quality to your life and making life easier for you. No, it's to lock you down. That's the whole purpose of it.
The use of questionable arguments, squarely focused on controlling people rather than benefiting the environment, should give everyone pause.
That was a health emergency, so we needed the vaccine passports. Now we have a climate emergency, and we need a system to control human behavior in Canada.
These are mechanisms of control that, you know, once they take hold of you, the ability to revolt or have a revolution will be gone. And it seems like that may be the intention. Don't allow the people to rise up against overreach and over control and authoritative states by implementing a system that can shut people down immediately.
So I think one of the reasons they want this new system that ultimately amounts to a control system is because they see it as the ultimate form of risk management. They essentially want to move to a system that's not unlike the feudal system that existed in medieval Europe. You have, you know, a privileged, untouchable upper class and a low class of serfs. But if you implement a system this way with the technology they're using, you don't have to worry about peasant rebellions. You can manage the risk of the underclass. So you surveil them constantly, you can turn their money on and off, you can turn their access to services and really anything else on and off as well.
What happens when your government goes rogue? What happens when your government becomes tyrannical? What happens when your government makes tyrannical demands against the population? What recourse do you have? The word slavery comes to mind, and I see it as being irreversible. I see that once we go to a digitized currency that is controllable by a central platform, that you will no longer have the freedoms to make those choices that we do now. That freedom will be gone.
To them, CBDCs is like the pinnacle of what they could achieve, and they're so close to it, but we have to stop it.
A documentary on CBDCs would not be whole unless it touched on the subject of Bitcoin. We must understand that without the invention of Bitcoin, CBDCs would not have been possible. In the middle of the financial crisis of 2008, Bitcoin was released anonymously onto cypherpunk forums. It was the first peer-to-peer encrypted digital money system that utilized blockchain technology. Now let's take a look at the background of Bitcoin.
At this very important time in US dollar history, right, it's the great financial crisis is like peaking.
The stock market is now down 21%.
It was the worst day on Wall Street since the crash of 1987.
This could be the most serious recession in decades.
What started in America last year has now spread to every part of the world.
It was released anonymously into this cypherpunk mailing list.
Now, this is the first peer-to-peer monetary transaction. In other words, you didn't need to go through a bank or a financial middle person.
The Bitcoin white paper that was published by an anonymous person.
Satoshi is what everybody calls him, right?
Yeah.
We don't even know if it's a him or her. We know nothing about this person. Publishes a fairly elaborate, brief white paper, which describes the technical basis for this new thing that the unknown person is calling Bitcoin.
The program was launched. I had won a victory against the banks, against state power.
It's immediately painted as this anti-dollar system, anti-central bank technology.
Crypto people aren't just in it to make a buck, they're in it to change the world forever.
Crypto is as important of an invention as the birth of the internet.
There's a lot of merit to it. If you're in a country where you're fearful of your government,
fearful of geopolitical risk,
this is a great potential long-term store of value.
It's no different than what gold represented over thousands of years. If the world is more frightened, it is an asset class that protects you.
Right. You could buy and sell your Bitcoin, no different than gold.
Is Bitcoin a true revolution from the beginning? Or was it always planned to be this Trojan horse for the Internet of Things? I'm not sure.
And I don't care if it was the CIA. It doesn't matter. The idea is still a great idea. Obviously, it was the CIA. I think we all know that. It's like Signal. They got there first. It's a honey trap.
Blockchain was invented by Bitcoin and forms the technological basis of CBDCs. The true identity of Bitcoin's inventor, Satoshi Nakamoto, remains a secret to this day. A man named Craig Wright claimed to be Satoshi, and another man was accused of being him. Both of these men made suspicious remarks implying that Bitcoin was an intelligence operation of some kind.
Newsweek reports that he is a mastermind behind Bitcoin.
64-year-old Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto emerged and walked right into a media frenzy. When confronted about Bitcoin, he said, "I am no longer involved in that, and I cannot discuss it."
I was the main part of it. Other people helped me. I didn't decide. I had people decide this matter for me.
Now there remains the possibility that the central bankers utilized the Western intelligence services to create Bitcoin. Bitcoin tested and prototyped cryptocurrency technology and served to market digital money as cool and anti-system. And now 15 years later, with all the programming having been done and the technology in a more mature state, the central bankers can cherry pick the best tech with which to deploy their CBDCs worldwide.
It's incredibly likely that Bitcoin was an intelligence operation that came out of the US or Britain or some sort of kind of the Five Eyes kind of system. It's entirely possible. I mean, there's a lot of connections with certain algorithms to the NSA. SHA-256, which is kind of the main hashing algorithm in Bitcoin, was invented by the NSA.
We are also now witnessing the rapid development of the Internet of Things and the Internet of Bodies. These are all information networks linking all people and things to the Internet. As well, NFTs, or non-fungible tokens, further build out the underlying technology required to enable digital IDs to take shape.
Internet of Things, or IoT, refers to billions of physical devices around the world that are now connected to the Internet, collecting and sharing data.
The Internet of Bodies, or IOB, is actually an ecosystem. It's a bunch of devices that are connected to the Internet that contain software and that either collect personal health data about you or can alter the body's function. We think of the Internet of Bodies as this collection of all these devices as well as all the data that the devices are gathering about you.
Now to the latest trend that's sweeping the internet, called NFT.
They're now selling for huge bucks.
Non-fungible tokens are digital tokens that enable true ownership of any kind of digital assets. You can't touch it, but you can own it. Told you had to pay attention.
NFTs are unique encrypted unforgeable ID tags for any object or asset, physical or virtual. This tech can be directly applied to the Internet of Things and the Internet of Bodies. Were NFTs also promoted to spur the development of tokenizing all assets worldwide? I suspect so.
Decentralized identifiers leverage proven cryptographic systems. When Alice presents her credentials, her digital wallet generates a unique identifier and signs it using a private key, secured by a biometric proof or PIN that only she knows. Decentralized identifiers leverage proven cryptographic systems.
Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI and ChatGPT, launched a project called WorldCoin. He stated his motivation to launch the project was to build the infrastructure needed for a universal basic income.
I thought that if we could do something to eventually redistribute wealth through some sort of global UBI at scale, or maybe even access to these systems, which would be the most important component of wealth someday.
Sam Altman has doubled down on his vision for another one of his ventures, WorldCoin cryptocurrency, that offers digital currency, sometimes for free, to those willing to scan their irises into a spherical device.
Many critics of CBDCs fear that a universal basic income will be the bait to gull the public into accepting a CBDC.
Give everyone a cattle tag and a shitcoin, basically. That's the WorldCoin model.
You know my views on CBDCs, and I'm really pleased that attention is now focused on the role that cryptos can play.
As the crypto markets matured, many exchanges emerged to trade Bitcoin for thousands of other alternative coins. These transactions were all denominated in fractions of Bitcoin and became difficult to calculate. So stablecoins emerged that were pegged to the US dollar or euro that made trading in and out of alternative coins much easier to do.
Traders buy tokens like Tether or USD coin with real dollars. Those tokens can then be used to trade bitcoins and other cryptocurrencies. Stablecoins are cryptocurrencies whose value are pegged to an existing asset, most often the US dollar, though there are others tied to the euro and gold too.
Stablecoins like Tether have been a way to transition the wild market of cryptos into the mainstream financial system. The biggest of these stablecoins is Tether, itself tethered to the US dollar.
Tether was the first of what's known as a stablecoin. Its price is pegged or tethered to that of the dollar, so one tether equals $1, 1-to-1 there.
In 2013, Bitfinex incorporates in Hong Kong. In September of 2014, Bitfinex operators set up Tether Limited in the British Virgin Islands. But they tell the public that Bitfinex and Tether are completely separate. The only reason we find out they aren't is because of the Paradise Papers leaks.
And on an average day, Tether sees more trading volume than Bitcoin or Ethereum. But Tether is not 100% backed by US dollars in a bank account. And according to JP Morgan, it is now the 7th largest holder of commercial paper in the world.
There's some controversy around it, and this is not short of that.
That's right. There's been plenty of controversy.
Its founders have a very questionable background.
This group of individuals who run Tether have a bit of, let's call it, to be charitable, a mixed reputation. Or that they've been printing tethers in some way to manipulate the price of Bitcoin.
We're seeing a worrying trend of the largest American banks moving into the Bitcoin and blockchain space. JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, they're going to issue stable coins to their retail-facing customers.
We have seen the biggest banks on Wall Street also issue their own US dollar tokens.
JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, they're all creating their own digital dollars.
JP Morgan rolling out the first cryptocurrency backed by a US bank.
If you are concerned about CBDCs because of the programmability and surveillance aspects, tokenized deposits and bank-issued stablecoins can do all of those things too.
They're recreating that exact same mechanism, except instead of the public sector, it's private banks. They want to blacklist someone, they want to seize your money, prevent a transaction from going through. It's much easier to do that through a private sector entity than it is through the public sector.
The Constitution of the United States prevents a CBDC system that will restrict people's rights. But private banks can restrict their customers with their private issue stablecoins without any constitutional problems.
We will see this fight against CBDCs by the likes of DeSantis and Trump and Vivek.
Governor Ron DeSantis took aim at a new currency the Biden administration is exploring.
Are you interested in giving these economic central planners more power?
I will never allow the creation of a central bank digital currency.
So when you have people like Trump and Ron DeSantis say no CBDC, they mean no public-facing CBDC. They don't mean no wholesale CBDC. What this second tier managed by the private banks is likely to be are things like tokenized deposits, stable coins.
And there'll be this total red herring false victory as then they move into the private stable coin system that in every single way is the CBDC, except it's not issued directly by the government.
There's going to be a two-tier system, not unlike what exists in the US today, where it's going to be one tier is the private sector and one tier is the public sector, i.e. the central bank. And it's basically going to be banks issuing stable coins or tokenized deposits, the reserves of which are banked at the Fed. A lot of people are hesitant about a CBDC because they see it as centralized government control. And so they're selling it this way, so we, will look at it as, oh, this is coming from the private sector. This is free market innovation and all of this stuff. But people forget that the Wall Street banks time and again have been caught engaging in brazen criminality.
January 11th, we saw 11 spot ETFs approved. Kind of the most important, sort of biggest signpost of that approval within these 11 was the iShares BlackRock spot ETF Bitcoin.
Explain that move into ETFs. How far does it go?
ETFs are going to be the new engine for fixed income.
Bitcoin has always been sort of, colored as this anti-state revolution and this total rejection against the powers that be, the financial elite. And here we have probably, the most important asset manager in the world in BlackRock coming out and ETFing Bitcoin.
We believe ETFs are a technology no different than Bitcoin was a technology for asset storage. We believe the next step going forward will be the tokenization of financial assets.
BlackRock has initiated a comprehensive effort to EFT everything. This is a stepping stone to a completely tokenized financial system where every asset on Earth is represented by an encrypted, unforgeable digital token. The goal of all this is the creation of a universal ledger of all the world's assets.
If you had a tokenized security, and you have a tokenized identity, the moment you buy or sell an instrument, it's known. It's on a general ledger that is all created together.
He recently was very overt about how there's going to be a universal ledger where all transactions are tracked, essentially.
I think you have to be open-minded to the fact that perhaps Bitcoin is the reverse Trojan horse to get us all to get onto a giant universal digital ledger.
I believe the next generation for markets, the next generation for securities will be tokenization of securities.
Everything will have a QSIP, everything will have a digital identity, and we'll be able to connect, this Internet of Things, and be able to verifiably, immutably, contain this current state of every token, of everything into some universal ledger.
As a side note, the EU has been pushing for an asset registry of all the assets of the EU. Now, historically, government censuses were always done shortly before massive confiscation programs. Why else would they need to know about your assets unless they intended to take them? The most basic definition of a government, one must remember, is the right to tax. So when we speak of a universal ledger containing all the world's assets, we are really seeing the attempt at the creation of a world government.
There's a lot of efforts right now, for example, to tokenize rainforests for the purpose of using it in this global carbon market. So that rainforest will also be given a unique identifier, a digital ID.
Another troubling initiative that the Rockefeller Foundation and the New York Stock Exchange came out with in the summer of 2020 was the Intrinsic Exchange Group.
Please welcome Intrinsic Exchange Group to launch of natural asset companies, a new asset class of sustainable enterprises.
They contrived the idea to create a new form of company, a natural asset company, that would claim to own the services that nature produces, such as the hydrologic cycle over North America. This semi-tangible asset would be placed in a company and then floated on the stock exchange.
IEG was founded in order to bring forward a new asset class based on nature, a new form of company. The natural asset company obtains the rights to the ecological services that nature produces.
The real purpose of this is to create more collateral by which the financial sector can expand upon. This will predictably create a financial bubble and crash on proportions not seen before.
It's really a totally insane scheme because they're turning all life, essentially, ecosystem services, lakes, rivers, forests, they're turning it into tradable Wall Street financial products.
These financial parasites claim that the funds raised by this scheme would be used to protect nature.
You could have a universal ledger that, you know, contains the state of every single human on Earth, where they are, what color their eyes are, how tall they are, what their body mass is, how much money they have in their bank account, how much land they own, how much carbon they output, how much fuel they've used, how far they've traveled.
And that means every stock, every bond will have its own, basically, CUSIP. It'll be on one general ledger. Every investor, you and I, will have our own number, our own identification.
They're essentially justifying, you know, extreme surveillance and all of this as a way for them to engage in unprecedented risk management, really, from their perspective, so that they can continue their rackets unimpeded, but the little people won't be able to engage in risky behavior.
Central bank digital currencies are part of a broader agenda pursued by international financial interests through governments, through NGOs, through the private sector, with the help of the mainstream media.
Welcome everyone here in the room and to those tuning in online for this panel discussing central bank digital coins.
The World Economic Forum is a think tank founded by Klaus Schwab in the early 1970s, and it has become an important platform for powerful interest groups to exchange ideas and to set up ideas about forming the future of humanity.
At this pivotal moment, I see several priorities for the global agenda. We must revitalize the global economy and accelerate its transition to net zero.
The states as we know them today are aggressive internally and externally, and of course there's a tendency for governments, for states to form a cartel and to basically harmonize their policies and coordinate their policies.
Has there been ever an example in history where when you give so much power to a small group of people over millions of other people, that this has been consistently used in a benevolent way and resulted in good outcomes?
So a lot of people view the UN sort of as a meeting of the different public sectors and governments of the world, but even the UN leadership have admitted that since at least in the 1990s, if not earlier, there was this move away from the public sector to having it emphasize public-private partnership. And the goal of that model in stakeholder capitalism is that the national government is merely an enabling environment and not a policy-setting entity. The policy setting comes from the level above national governments, and national governments are just the policy enforcers that create the enabling environments for the private sector partners of the UN and the WEF and groups like that.
The push for CBDCs is the final step in a multi-decade program by central planners to increase their power over the people, over countries. This is the ultimate step because the powers of CBDCs are so extraordinary that, I mean, even the worst dictators in past centuries could only have dreamt of having such enormous power over the lives of so many people.
Behind all of these ideas to program money is the idea to central plan the economy, the idea that the government has to intervene more efficiently because market participants do not do something voluntarily. Yeah, of course you could then just freeze money of people so they could not spend anymore, driving down inflation rate. You can introduce the Schwundgeld, that money loses value, making people to spend their money instead of hoarding it. But once you have digital currencies, you cannot escape. Yeah? There can be no bank runs that people get cash out of their bank, and therefore you can lower interest rates minus 10%, minus 20%.
The U.S. Is on an unsustainable fiscal path. That has been true for a long time. That is associated with our uniquely expensive healthcare delivery system and our aging population.
Historically, war has been the excuse governments have to default on their debts.
The system is going to collapse the same as communism collapsed. It's just not sustainable. And that's actually what Powell is talking about. The system will collapse of its own weight. We don't need guns and revolutions and stuff like that. It's not going to be sustainable. This is the elimination to them of the underground economy. Europe thinks, for example, that they will have increased their taxation collection by 35%. A conservative estimate that these people have is that they will be able to terminate the underground economy and collect 35% more in taxes. CBDCs right now are being used largely because the financial system is imploding. They've been borrowing money since World War II with no intention of paying anything back. It's getting completely out of control at this stage in the game. 70% of the spending of the national debt is just interest, accumulative interest, because they never pay anything off.
As government spending reaches unsustainable levels, there's no way it could all be paid.
The debt could never possibly be paid back.
A central bank digital currency, I believe, is a threat to liberty in this country because it creates a mechanism for the government to be able to wipe out your bank account or wipe out your dollars if you say or do something that the government disapproves of, as you see in places like China. As you see even happen to the Canadian truckers, the Freedom Envoy, losing access to their financial bank accounts.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoking emergency powers against the truckers who are protesting vaccine mandates. Banks can now freeze their personal accounts.
To better understand what is in store for us with CBDCs, I visited Ottawa, Canada, and interviewed two prominent members of the Canadian Freedom Convoy.
As a former law enforcement officer who spent his entire career ensuring that people's rights and freedoms were upheld, I attend a peaceful protest in the capital city, and although I am here to help and assist in whichever way I can to be helpful to the people of this community, my accounts are frozen simply because I spoke out against the actions of my government. And if that isn't tyranny, I don't know what is.
The trucker convoy started after the federal government in this country held the Canadian truckers up as heroes for about a year and a half, and then decided one day that they must now be vaccinated to cross into the United States.
And it was a group of truckers from all across the country, east, west, every province of the country. And they decided to unify on social media and decide that they had grievances that needed to be discussed with the federal government.
And that was really the seed that was planted, and then it had grown into this big movement of what it was. Who better than to come to Ottawa with a big giant vehicle, sit in front of the House of Commons and not be ignored?
It was a peaceful demonstration. The people that came here, it was surprising. There were tens of thousands of people that attended.
2 border blockades, one in Ontario and one in Alberta, are disrupting hundreds of millions of dollars in Canada-US trade, ranging from cattle to car parts.
The government didn't respond, actually, and they went into hiding.
We have had Canadians' backs.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has refused to meet with protest organizers while butting heads with opposition lawmakers over coronavirus restrictions.
In response to the COVID vaccine mandates, Canadians descended upon the Capitol in peaceful protest. Police invited the truckers into the city and allowed them to set up encampments around the Parliament. But after 10 days of peaceful protesting, a state of emergency was declared. The bank accounts of the key protesters were frozen, and the police descended upon the encampments and made arrests. These account freezers are an example of what can and will be done under a CBDC system.
When the police came in, they were extremely violent. One of the groups that they attacked were Canadian veterans, and they did this right in front of the National War Memorial. The police moved in and beat the hell out of Canadian veterans badly. That wasn't what woke up Canadians. That wasn't what shocked the world. What woke Canadians up was when they went after bank accounts.
By the time we were into week 4, the government declared a state of emergency and invoked what's called the Emergency Measures Act in Canada.
The federal government has invoked the Emergencies Act.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoked the Emergencies Act for the first time in history.
The police will be given more tools to restore order in places where public assemblies can constitute illegal and dangerous activities.
And the Emergency Act gave police authorities and all government officials more power to act on that situation. And one of those first harsh measures was the freezing of a number of bank accounts.
Financial institutions will be authorized or directed to help address the situation by regulating and prohibiting the use of property to fund or support illegal blockades.
They use the authority under something we have here called FinTrack, and FinTrack is supposed to be used for monitoring of domestic and international terrorism financing. So they use the legislation under FinTrack to attack the bank accounts of Canadians who were here peacefully protesting.
The government decided as one of the measures to freeze bank accounts of some of the truckers, some of the attendees, and some of the people that had donated money to this protest. When I say accounts frozen, that means your personal account, your joint accounts with your spouse, your family accounts, they were shut down, and people were completely locked out of being able to fund any of their operations.
The vast majority of people had their bank accounts, including me, frozen. We were never charged. There was never a warrant for our arrest. We've never been convicted of anything.
It was, in effect, an extrajudicial process. Does the government and law enforcement agencies have authority to randomly contact banks and shut down your account without judicial process? And my answer, and the answer of many Canadians, is no. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Bill of Rights says no.
They've deputized the banks to take action against you, to make it almost impossible for you to be a productive member of society, because if you don't have a bank in Canada, how do you get a mortgage, a car payment, go grocery shopping? And we're seeing this move towards everything being digital. If you don't have access to a bank card, how are you supposed to participate in Canadian society?
We're lucky that at this point we still have cash that we can rely on, but if it wasn't for that cash, you have no recourse.
My son has a very complicated medical history, and my credit card was on file with his drugstore to get his heart medication, and we couldn't get his heart medication because my accounts were frozen. You're not allowed to protest in this country, and if you do, they're just going to go after your financial assets without any form of due process.
Following the freezing of the bank accounts, the government moved in to shut down this protest, and it did. It came in heavy-handed and used a substantial amount of force to beat and arrest a number of peaceful protesters into submission to clear the area. That's how it ended. These are mechanisms of control that, once they take hold of you, the ability to revolt or have a revolution will be gone. And it seems like that may be the intention. Don't allow the people to rise up against overreach and over-control and authoritative states by implementing a system that can shut people down immediately.
The world is currently dividing into Eastern and Western blocs, similar to the Cold War period, with the US and EU on one side and the BRICS countries of Russia, China, Brazil, India, Iran, and Turkey on the other. Now we must all come together, demand an end to these pointless conflicts, and not be gulled into accepting tyrannical systems of control. While the West has increasingly politicized the SWIFT payment system to block Russia, the IMF has quietly positioned itself to offer a wholesale CBDC platform that will rival the SWIFT system.
What we do not yet have is international settlement based on CBDCs.
The United Nations and its agencies, such as the IMF and World Bank, are controlled by the same people that control the central banks, and they cannot be trusted. The solutions they propose are deceptive and against the interests of humanity. If a CBDC system is put into place, it will devastate the economies of the world.
We are talking about a very dystopian future if we allow central banks to issue central bank digital currencies. Even if the original designers and heads of central banks who are launching this are super well-meaning, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. We just know what human nature is like, and history is the best guide. If you give power to people, power gives temptations. And the reality is most people can't handle those temptations and will succumb to them. And the temptations of power are to do things that are not good for those that are under this power. It will be a completely totalitarian system of such frightening proportions, it's hard to imagine.
I think it would promote revolution, honestly, when people realize they have zero liberty left.
I think the greatest thing at this point is to become familiar with what a CBDC is, understand the difference between cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, blockchain, and a central bank digital currency. I think it's imperative that we stand our ground and that we say no.
When we talk about such a radical change with the creation of a CBDC, that means the government can become involved with every step of your life. Whether it's something mundane like fixing a tax return or something large like trying to track down where you went, the door is open wide for government overreach and abuse. And the government that quickly seems like something that's out of sight and out of mind can quickly dominate your life. And that's something that you should very much be concerned about before it becomes a reality.
And our computer's showing we're heading into a recession from May of 2024 into 2028. Raising taxes, going to CBDCs, all of this stuff will reduce the economic activity, period. War, inflation, stagflation into 2028.
So we're fucked for 4 years.
Yes.
It's important to start this debate from the value of individual or personal freedom. Because look at WHO, look at UN, look at other international institutions, you know, these are full of bureaucrats. They have people who are not elected by the people. And clearly they don't work for the people, but against them. So we need to go back to the basis.
I would recommend people who are opposed to central bank digital currency and the threats that it poses to write their congressman. I think once it's brought on board, once it's brought online, and it becomes a commonly accepted medium of exchange, it's going to be pretty futile to tell people not to use it.
Do we want to live in such a society where a small group of central planners have this extraordinary power over everyone's lives? I mean, there's no freedom. That by definition ends freedom, and then you don't even need to speculate what further horrible thing could happen after this or as a result of this. It's already enough, I think, to realize we must stop this, and that should be high priority. And I think we should go out and organize demonstrations in front of the central banks.
The proposal for a CBDC and this sort of government takeover of finance very much runs in contrast to the founding of the United States. It runs in contrast to the values of the United States. It is the opposite of having a limited government that doesn't get in the way of free people acting. It instead creates an over-expansionary government that restricts the freedom of people. And that is something that could not be more opposite to the founding of this country.
I was born and lived for 11 years in a totalitarian regime, and I don't want to do it anymore. And for as long as I will be in the office in the European Parliament, I will be fighting to the end and with all my strength and power against this totalitarian system.
Socialist or communist ideas can only be overcome by ideas of liberalism and capitalism, and so we have to engage in this battle of ideas. I think there's no way around it. And also we have to remind ourselves that there is something like sound economics. We can know that, for instance, socialist and communist experiments don't work, that they bring impoverishment and suffering to the great majority of the people. And we shouldn't make these mistakes which have been made in the past again.
As real money is replaced by programmable money, the economy will revert to barter and a black market will emerge. This will cause inefficiencies and reduce the standard of living. We can expect local government monies and private monies to emerge as a result. Now, in the 1830s and in the 1930s, the federal government of the United States took actions that undermined the national currency. In both periods, cities and private companies issued monies to fill in the gap that the government created through their mistakes. The human need to trade and prosper will always overcome tyranny. It just depends on how inefficient it gets.
We are in a situation where the fiscal budgets are just out of control and will continue to get out of control. So the CBDCs, for example, are a means to impose control to try and retain that power. They see it as the means to collect more money. They think they'll be able to collect more taxes by 35%. These are currencies issued here by the County of Atlanta in New Jersey. These are all from, the 1930s because there was a shortage of money around. The states and cities and counties will be able to issue their own money, and that's the resolution to a CBDC.
Is that a hopeful message, or?
I think so.
Okay.
That they're not going to survive. CBDC is not going to be what they think they're going to accomplish with it. The government is going to think that they can force everybody into their agenda with a CBDC, and this is the solution to it. You will see private currencies take place, and people will use even gold coins, silver coins, anything from a physical perspective. You can't force people to do something that is against common sense. And that is what they've always done, and it has always failed.
The commitment to employ central bank digital currencies is clear. The question is, will we accept it? What will our reaction be to a government's ability to monitor what we're doing and ultimately control our behavior?
Bureaucracy always wants to increase its powers. And that has been actually literally the history of central banking. They've used every step over the decades to just increase their power more and more and more. In fact, the central bankers have been beneficiaries of every crisis. So they had no incentive to avoid a crisis because they know to the next crisis we get more power. And the argument has always been, oh wow, we couldn't stop this crisis because we didn't have enough power in this and that and that. And so after that crisis, they get that. Now, next crisis, they will give you another excuse and then tell you why they needed more powers. And this is literally what happened.
I recommend people support your local economies, build relationships, and opt out of these centralized systems as much as you can. As a side note, to close the film, I recently lived through Hurricane Helene. The power, water, internet, and cellular services were knocked out. For over a week, the only way to transact at all was with cash. If cash were not available as a means to trade, a chaotic situation would have turned violent. I interviewed several people at local gas stations, asking them what things would be like if cash were not available. Here's what they had to say.
Well, if we didn't have cash, things would get frustrating, people would get chaotic, there would be fights, it'd just be plumb craziness.
We couldn't use cash, everybody would be losing their minds, going insane a little bit,
If we couldn't use cash right now, it would be a pretty big mess because there's no places that are taking credit cards. So I'm really thankful that we can use cash.
This experience showed me another reason never to get rid of cash. In a severe natural disaster, without cash, full chaos will ensue. Help me share this film and this information, and stay free.